it's harder for when people are being presented stuff, they can just be like, that's good enough. And they can just say like, that looks nice, but they don't realize the power and the psychology of how our brains categorize and sort. Like, what a brand, what a brand, what a brand, what a mighty good brand. Say it again now. What a brand, what a brand, what a brand, what a mighty good brand. Let's talk today about the power of font. Font is such an important aspect to branding, and it's what a lot of brands overlook. Fonts are as important, if not more important, than the logo, because the way that your brain understands the design of the font adds quite a bit to the experience that the brand provides.
I don't know, until we started talking about it, I never even really thought fonts mattered. But then as soon as you told me, or we had discussed why they matter in terms of being part of an overall brand, and now I can immediately pick up when it doesn't match something about the brand or when they've picked a bad font.
It's interesting because fonts need to work with the entire visual identity. Like, it needs to complement the colors, it needs to complement the architecture of the logo, and it adds to the universe that the brand is trying to create. Most people, though, don't realize the importance of font, and they default to generic fonts that a lot of people use. Like, Montserrat is a font that a lot of businesses use, same with Poppins. And it's hard to differentiate yourself and not become a part of a sea of sameness by using the same font that everybody else uses.
This is one thing I think people can consider in fonts. And I think a lot of people miss it because we're taught to read in a letter format, like you read every letter, make a word. But having taken a speed reading course, you can learn to read like 6 words at a time, right? And then when you're thinking about your brand and your microscript, your brain actually isn't seeing each letter and kind of reading. Your brain is seeing a picture of a phrase. And so the font helps capture what you want the phrase to capture. You know, by the way it's illustrated.
Like the context
like
of
the way
the
it's
word.
illustrated creates the feeling. If it's a soft font and you have a soft message, but if it's a bold microscript, then you want, you know, it supports the messaging, but it requires kind of an artist's skill to make sure it matches properly.
It's really interesting because font really provides so much context to a brand. But I would say font problems aren't weighted equally. Like, small businesses, I find their biggest issue with font is either they're using a generic font that makes it harder for the consumer to differentiate them because it looks the same as so many other industries, and it also looks very small business. But I also find small businesses suffer from wanting something that looks pretty but is very hard to read, and it's very illegible. And then there's also an art to balancing your H1 and your body font, and that's also important. So when your brand should have a font family. So it's typically 2 fonts. It can be 3 fonts. If you have 3 fonts, it's typically a stylized version of one of the 2 fonts, typically the headline font. So if you're using like our brand font is Ivy Presto. So Ivy Presto is a font family. It has different weights, and then it also has like an italics version of it, so like a slanted version. So RH2 could be an italicized thin font versus the H1 could be a bolded of that font family. So it's the same font, but it looks different because it has a different weight or stylization to it. So what we often see with businesses, and you should also have your body font be a sans serif. So the difference between serif and sans serif is like those pretty little licks. So like a Times New Roman is a serif font, and then sans serif is without the licks. So that's where you get more of that like tech feeling of font, where it's like more rounded and it doesn't have the licks. Times New Roman fonts with licks, or the serifs, typically represent something more prestigious, something more like elevated, like a law firm. You see older.
It's more of the antiquated calligraphy element.
Times New Roman is an extremely old font. I think it's like one of the original fonts, like when fonts were
Roman. I don't know.
Yeah, no, true. But I don't think they had fonts then. Like, I think it's like 18th century. I should Google that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Times New Roman is from 1932, and it was commissioned by a British newspaper. We have a font expert in-house at TEI, and I find it really interesting for us to learn the history and the psychology behind fonts. Like, there's really so much that goes into a font, and what you're seeing that's really cool is more and more bigger brands are commissioning artists to create custom fonts for them. So this is interesting for two reasons. The first is when businesses are transitioning between being, let's say, a brand into a good brand, and you're now investing in getting rebranded by a professional agency, you will be often shocked to find that the cool fonts or the fonts really rooted in psychology that will help shape how your customer feels about your brand cost money. And the licensing fees are actually quite high because there was basically the fonts that are created outside, like the Times New Roman or the Poppins, which are considered like the Google fonts or the free fonts, they're developed by an artist custom. So you have to pay really big dollars. Like, it's a whole industry, the font industry. So these big brands are getting basically these agencies to commission to create custom fonts because, one, they can save money on licensing fees, and two, it's a font that nobody else can use. So they can create their own iconic font. And this started becoming a big thing in 2010 with tech companies. You saw Android launch one, Google launched one. Let me actually read them to you. So in 2010, you had Android's Roboto font, Google's Product Sans, Apple San Francisco, YouTube Sans, Samsung One, and then you also later had Netflix Sans, Airbnb Serial, Uber Move, Twitter's Chirp, Burger King's Flame, and Popeye's Chicken Sans. So it also becomes...
Those should all pop up.
But it also becomes like a part of the brand, like to name your font in extension to what that brand represents.
Well, like even for the word Uber, like it just takes it makes artistry out of a word.
Yeah.
Right. So, but it's always tied to letters, right? As opposed to, it'd be interesting if you tried it to the word, right? So you're making your word or your microscript look more impactful through artistry of language.
Yeah.
Artistry of language. It's interesting, but
it's interesting. It's like, the topic of font is so obvious to people who get into like a certain area of their business. Like once you decide to rebrand and you do it at a professional level, you are exposed to the importance of font. But a lot of like the small businesses that are struggling, I would have you reflect and look at your font and be quite critical of it, because where I find small businesses hold themselves back is they don't understand the obviousness and the simplicity of how our brains categorize products when we look at them.
Can I jump? I think I remembered, because first of all, for a lot of small business owners, unless they're incredibly artistic, it's a new thing to think about your font necessarily. You just kind of like one thing or another. And but it also shows on that pathway of brand progression. So you start a business, and so you have a business and a brand. So generally, you just don't want to make a critical error on your font, right? Like when you're starting a business. But then once you start growing into a good business, then you kind of get this phase. Okay, we're gonna relook at things. Are we messaging? Now you kind of can start looking at subtler things. And just imagine in a house, as you go up the scale of house quality, the details start to matter more.
Yeah.
The details start to matter more, and so then you get a good one. But if you want to go to a great one, then you want like artistry into your font, and you have to have somebody who can tell you what you need to know, because you can't know everything. Like if you're great at supply chain, management, it's hard to know what font helps you get more sales or create your brand.
Well, it's interesting because if you are in listening to this, analyze the best brands, right? Like brand execution at the highest level should appear simple. So when you pull up a website like Airbnb or an app like Uber, or you look at like Level 8, that was at Sleep brand we looked at the other day. When you go onto their website, even Apple, like there's very few data points to create an understanding right away, right? And it's really comes down to imagery, colors, and font.
Can I think even to maybe more the male or whatever sided brain, when you look at a beautiful Porsche, it doesn't have tons of angle. You know what I mean?
No,
Like
it's font and color and design.
like it's well done. Like just even the car, right? Like it's the simplicity of design, which is sometimes people are like, oh, it's so simple. Oh, it's just like 4 letters. It's well, to get Just Do It to look the best, probably spends 6 months because you have a microsecond to have people pay attention. And so those details are important. But when you look at a car that looks beautifully aesthetic, it's the same as looking at a logo or a microscript, and it looks perfectly aesthetic. And
But where it's different though is their logo is a font-based logo, right? Like it's their name written out versus like the Porsche like crest, right? Like that's kind of more, I would say, their icon. But that is the product and execution. Porsche.
We learned on
we
the
know
last
this.
podcast.
Yes, I still feel like an idiot when I say Porsche, even though it's right. But when you like look at the iPad, like if I'm gonna hold up the iPad, like this is the product as you experience it, and there's the Apple, on the back. But when you go to the Apple website, that's where font lives. Oh, so they've just gone totally down to an icon. So this is a bad example.
like those are the old, but you can see that the way they wrote Apple has changed over the years.
Oh yeah, totally. And it like this, like Apple is like
that one on the top right is gross.
Oh, horrible. But that's also like of the
I wonder what
time,
year
right?
that was. Yeah. Then there's a thick one. Look at the one with the rainbow.
But this is an important discovery. Like your logo, even if it's written out,
because that font looks good, right? Yeah. Like it looks clean in tech.
So clean in tech.
Apple here, it's just like the font.
They take font so seriously. But that's an interesting point that you bring up, though, right? Is there are many brands where their name is a font, right? Their logo is a font type because it rests more on their name than on an emblem. So like Buc-ee's is an example of like their brand is an icon. It's a beaver, right? Whereas Apple is an icon. It's the bitten apple.
But you can't have a serif logo and then sans serif font, can you?
Totally. You actually should.
Yeah.
So you actually have a more stylized, because it's harder to write body content. It depends. Font is so psychologically tied to what you represent. So if you are a law firm, if you are a research agency, if you are in data, like you're kind of like a market research data company. If you're something that's rooted more in like education and expertise, having serif body and serif headline could make sense. Typically, though, it's a different weight or you would use like a font family. Most brands today, the trend is that you would use a serif headline and a sans serif body because it's easier to read body paragraph that's serif than having the licks. That's also often like that's what small businesses miss, is that you can pick a headline font that looks nice as a headline because you seldom see more than a sentence of text in a headline font versus seeing paragraphs with the licks. It's a very different reading experience. So when we're talking about the customized font, of course logos are customized and they should be customized. So when you're working with the designer and you're creating a font-based logo, they should be manipulating the font type so that it's uniquely your own. So they can use a free font or...
It's like a color palette.
Yes.
Right? And I think when people go onto a website, subconsciously you don't know why sub-websites seem just very easy or pleasant to navigate. It's because your brain is seeing something that flows. It's like if you go onto a color palette that doesn't work, your brain doesn't like it, and you don't know why you don't like it. Same thing can happen with font.
But I think it's harder for when people are being presented stuff, they can just be like, that's good enough. And they can just say like, that looks nice, but they don't realize the power and the psychology of how our brains categorize and sort. Like if you look at baby products, they're very commonly like soft nude tone palettes. You will have like rounder, lulling fonts. It will seem very kind and approachable and for children. Like if I was to give you words, like that's what would come to mind. if you think of energy drink companies, it's very bold. It's very striking colors. It's sharper fonts. It's more cap-like fonts. Like you get kind of more, it's more aggressive. So if you were to compare like baby companies versus energy drink companies, that may seem obvious to you because you were so used to it because this is being sold at the highest level. But you need to understand, what does your consumer expect from your caliber and your category of brand, and how can you ensure that your font furthers that connection representation? You're looking for your brand to hold real estate in your consumer's mind.
Yeah, we saw a construction company the other day that actually had fonts that were kind of like the softer babyish fonts, and we're like, and they probably didn't know it, but that was what was incongruent about their branding when they were looking at it. Is they probably at the beginning some nice designer said, hey, doesn't this look nice? And then they grew into this big company, but their font didn't match their messaging of tough products.
You actually see it all the time in small to medium sized businesses. They don't realize how powerful the psychology is, and it can be something as small as your font that's really holding you back. Because if someone sees your brand and they can't figure out how to sort you, like this has happened so many times when I'm walking by, especially like brick and mortar, like stores, where they'll like create some kind of signage, they hired someone to do it, and they don't realize how incongruent their offering is to their branding, and you'll never walk inside the door. And if you do walk inside the door, you can have a great experience and you can get customers, but you don't realize who you're missing.
Let's double down on that point, because I think you went fast over it. It's something we should capture when we walk by it more, but how often you see like that kind of promotion that just doesn't align with the store, and so you don't go in it. Like it doesn't, like we've evolved into hunter gatherers. Like we're looking for things that capture our brain and pull us in, and it has to fit certain parameters. And how many times do we walk by and we're like, what the hell is that? Like
I find this is actually a massive issue with small and medium-sized businesses. And it's like the logo is not enough. Like the logo is such a small aspect of the brand. So much of how the brand makes you feel is through the font and through the colors, because that's where you get additional data points, right? Like the logo, only in really well executed branding can the logo alone create an entire experience. Like and it's also, when you look at like an Airbnb and like their logo is great, let's say they had a storefront outside and we would all know it. We wouldn't all know what it is because of that storefront. We know what it is because of how much exposure they've had in market, and it's been imprinted in our mind, and it owns real estate that's told us what they do. You don't own that real estate yet. And if your font sucks, you're not going to make a connection that makes sense in your customer's mind, and you're losing business.
There's almost something like digital shelf space in your mind that you can equate to when you go down the grocery store aisle, and you have like one product or another sitting beside each other. The way that it presents to your brain, like our primitive brain at one level, like your eyes get attracted to one thing or the other and the font has a big thing to do with it and what it's saying. So I think as I'm thinking about your promotion, understanding human minds, the reason why we see faces in the clouds is because we've been evolved to create shapes and patterns where they don't necessarily exist, so we can understand the world. And when we're doing these promotions, often they're just cluttered. Like they don't create an image or something that attracts us into it. It's too much. And if we were to go back into the 70s, there was this advertising trend of making the images almost sexual. It'd be interesting to go back and look at it, but you were saying one thing, but the actual image overlay was sexual, right? And I think we've kind of lost that art of suggestion in how we brand to attract people in. Font is one way to seduce.
I get what you're saying. I think that's interesting. Mm-hmm. But even at a more basic level, your font has to not necessarily even suggest something else. It needs to tell you exactly what you do. Mm-hmm. And like
we got off font.
We're in an attention economy, so like you need to be telling people exactly what you do, who you are, and why you're the best person for the job. And if your font doesn't suggest that, there's a massive opportunity cost that's impacting your business. And until you take that visual aspect seriously, it's what I think is really weird about the visual aspect of branding, that it becomes so difficult to quantify or to decide, if we should invest in improving the brand, because they can be doing good enough, like especially that construction company, like clearly they're doing good enough. It's just the question comes down to like, what are you losing? What are you missing out on? And how could you improve? How could your visual identity also improve your customers' experience so that they're more inclined to refer you to other people, or they're more inclined to use you again? Like, there is something to the psychology of how you make people feel as they're going through the transaction also. So here are some examples of brands that had invested in custom font to elevate or change their brand, and you can see from the way that they change, like what it suggests psychologically. So I find the ones that are the most interesting are Airbnb, Spotify, and Pinterest.
See, to me, Google seems like a change, because that original Google was like they were this fun tech guys, but then it became
Actually kind of more scary.
Yeah, like it become like a scary tech giant. Like,
yeah,
it's interesting.
it's interesting, like how that font. You're right. Like to the left, it to me is so quintessentially like the mid 2000s. Like so that's a serif font, and that kind of like light serif feel, like really kind of pushing into the sans serif world, like was very 2000s. It's kind of what like Oprah's brand felt like. It's what Weight Watchers felt like. It's like so many iconic. UGG kind of felt like that. Like this was kind of that time period. Even Facebook, like I feel like Facebook and Google both really give you that like I'm a scary tech giant feel. Microsoft's also interesting because it really felt on both sides an example of the times.
Yeah, it just seems weaker. The second Microsoft seems empty, whereas the first one is like
the Facebook, Google, and Microsoft are actually all so close together.
Yeah.
That it's
interesting.
It's really interesting. And what's really interesting is that on the left-hand side,
they're so different.
So different.
Yeah.
And what I find, the Microsoft to the left actually almost looks like it could be auto parts.
Yes.
Which is...
But it was driving the computer world. Like to me, it was like Microsoft is driving computer world,
and that's why inspiration.
And that's why it's almost got the lean to the right. You know what I mean? Like it's driving you. That's what I got the feel from it. Now when I look at it, I don't see the whole word when I look at the second Microsoft.
To me, it feels though where the brand is now, where it's like kind of clean and forgotten. You know, like
no, it's a tech giant that's making billions in places you don't know.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. That's really
right. Whereas on the left, it was much more consumer focused.
Yeah.
Right. On the right, it's we've got AI, we've got data.
Sorry.
Oh, that's crazy. Hey.
Oh, I like that.
1980 to 1982.
That's how it started
Metallica.
at 72. Look
That
at
is
75.
Crazy.
1980. Yeah, it does look like Metallica. That's hilarious.
Well, they ripped off the Metallica logo.
They did.
That's really interesting. I think that you nailed it with the driving. That's exactly what it is, because it has movement in it, especially between the O and the F.
Yeah.
And it's very slightly italicized, and it feels like it's moving, which is... You nailed it. Go back to the other one, Jasmine. What I find the most interesting is when I look at Spotify and Airbnb.
Yeah.
Those so look like underfunded startups where like their secondary thought is branding.
You know what also I think from a branding perspective? It's trying to be literal in the font. So Airbnb, it looks like air mattress.
Interesting.
And
yeah, it does.
Spotify has the little music thing, like it's on a record player.
But it also feels like a party. Like I wonder if they created it like it was like party playlist.
So you could play your playlist, right? So they're trying to capture the essence.
You know what it also feels like? Twister.
Yeah.
Like kind of like how it's like moving.
Yeah.
Pinterest, I find it really interesting that they would have launched with that stylized T, because there's already so much going on with the P.
Yeah.
It feels off balance, but again, that was also kind of a figment of the time. On the fashion side, I find it really interesting. For me, like okay, wait, sorry. Before we move over, if we were to pull out Pinterest, so if it was to go Facebook, Google, Microsoft, Spotify, eBay, they all look so much the same.
Yeah. Zero serif. Like nobody has serif on
in the tech space. Like that's how you show tech. It's like simple, it's clean, it's easy. It's like.
But even in the fashion, all serif is gone.
But it's what's interesting in fashion is it's all capped.
Yeah.
So like the style right now is just cap lock. Like you're just making a statement by the name and the name alone.
Yeah.
I find the fashion one really interesting that they've all gone cap locks.
I just find it very kind of uninteresting, their fonts, though.
Well,
Like, I don't find them to be that,
Interesting, yeah.
like, that artistic.
On-
Especially since they're a design company, you know what I mean?
I think, though, that I'm okay with that.
Like Saint Laurent versus Yves Saint Laurent.
Well-
I never liked the Saint Laurent. Like, YSL, I understood. Saint Laurent, I don't get it. And the original Burberry, I think I got.
The original Burberry, I would say on there, the only one that shouldn't have changed was the Burberry.
Yeah.
And the Balenciaga. I think
Yeah,
the old
I agree with
Balenciaga
you.
was timeless. I think Balmain was outdated. That needed to change.
Yeah.
Rimowa, I like the older one better, but I can understand it. Like,
But
it's
that looks like
more
a kitchen
retro.
appliance to me.
Rimowa.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. It does. But DVF, I really like the most. Like, I think
Yeah.
that was a nice change. But to your point, what I think is interesting in fashion is outside of, this is why Yves Saint Laurent made sense. The only time that their logo matters is when it's like plastered on a product. Otherwise, it's a tag. Right? So
yeah.
like for them, like having a cap lock tag where like it's very clear what brand it is actually makes more sense. Like on the
Yeah,
back of a shirt
sure,
or back of
yeah.
a dress. When it's like on a bag, like that's why Balmain made more sense. Is like it made they were kind of famous for their their printed tees.
Yeah.
And that was just so specific for a certain kind of customer that they needed to make it more like, it's funny to say this in luxury, but like more inclusive, so that different
Yeah.
different types of people would want to wear it. Like this is very like Italian or like
Yeah,
older
yeah,
Euro to
yeah,
the
yeah.
left.
You're right.
And Saint Laurent, they had the same issue because the YSL looked really stylized and dated on a big bag, and you saw a big push for that in the mid to late 2000s of like re-wearing brands for brand's sake. So YSL, they use the YSL in a really cool stack, especially like on shoes. And that was really where the brand lived, was like on kind of, they'd put it on like the front part of your shoe, and like it looked really quite nice. But in any other application, it needed to be cleaned up, because YSL also really pushes for being this like clean, edgy, kind of leathery brand. And like to the left, it feels more like dated, like old lady makeup than it does like a high fashion leather brand. So the transition makes sense. DVF, I think, is the most interesting because she had such a moment with the wrap dresses, and that was so big in the early 2000s, but that was really her only thing. So I find this really interesting.
I see. I bet you there'll be a throwback at some point where people will want the old version of the luxury.
Totally.
brands, right?
But totally. And that's where, so it's actually interesting. Saint Laurent actually kind of went back to its almost more original feel. The stylized YSL was very early 2000s.
You know how we can maybe tie this in that I think we saw that one video or whatever, the person was talking about vibe, no vibe,
Yeah.
right? Like in the fashion industry, they used to have vibe, and it looks like when you go to the right, it's taking away
From the vibe.
right? They look similar down the right side of fashion, and
It's an interesting way of looking at it, because you're right. Like, it's interesting. I have two opinions on this. On one hand, when I look at Burberry, that's one I actually really disagree with, because I feel like Burberry has lost who they are.
Yeah.
Like, it's okay to just be a tartan brand that isn't growing, 20% year over year. Like, just be really iconic in that segment and have everybody really want that like classic Burberry tartan.
and you live forever.
Yeah, and that's okay.
Yeah.
But I like their one on the left more, because that horse means something. Like it signals something.
I actually think the font captures what I feel about Burberry.
Yeah,
which I don't get any feel from the right Burberry.
No, it just feels
No
cement. No vibe. But I will say, on where I don't disagree with it from the vibe perspective is, this is what's tough about fashion, and fashion specifically, is that what makes that industry is creating different collections 4 times a year. Society needs to move away from that, but the way that the industry standard is set, this makes more sense so that the art of fashion can evolve and it can have different looks complemented by a tag that's vibeless, because the vibe is supposed to be created from the collection.
But has Chanel? I wonder if we could see if Chanel has changed its
It
font.
definitely has, because
Yeah.
right now it has the same concept. It's like cap lock, but we should look. Let's search
Because that's
that.
to me that's like the OG of brands. This and they do the fashion industry, but they
I'd be more interested in Hermes. I find
yeah.
Chanel right now is actually not impressive. Like their Chanel logo change. No, it's no change.
That's what I didn't think so.
And that shows you like how iconic it is,
That's why I was
because
saying
it
it.
literally matches exactly where those brands were.
But they had that before.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So they kind of owned that feel, and I think it worked with the C's back to back.
Those C's back to back is iconic. But
And
what I find interesting though is like these brands, like when you look at that list of fashion brands, like really other than Burberry, the rest are new. Like they don't have the longevity, like they don't have the same cachet as Hermes and Chanel.
Mm-hmm.
But what's interesting is that Hermes and Chanel have been capped locked fonts for over 100 years. You got to cough out of the thing. They've had cap fonts way before. So it's really interesting that and that's timeless. That's a vibe. This is kind of where the conversation of like, there's luxury and there's legacy. Like anyone can create a brand that has the right capital to sell something at an extremely high price point and have nice looking stores. And that can be considered luxury, but it's not legacy. Right. Yeah. And like, that's kind of, we're in a world where you can manufacture luxury. And when you look at the original pillars of what made a luxury good, like one of them was a rich heritage. And like many brands today that are in this luxury box don't have that. They're transient, like they're throwaway. So we're looking at a list of brands that are relevant today, but like nothing that Balenciaga does it would be by the four pillars, like what luxury is.
No, it won't exist in 5 years, especially when they get bought up by giant corporations.
They're all owned by one.
Right? And then it's all just increase market share, not make a legacy brand.
Yeah.
So as soon as a legacy brand gets purchased by a big conglomerate, its valuation, if I was to bet against that brand, I would bet shorts on that brand once it gets bought up.
I would also just bet short on Balenciaga. Like I don't see anybody going to that store downtown. Like I don't understand. I wonder if like Balenciaga is money laundering, because like I don't get it.
In the end, you can hire somebody to create a font for you. Probably not the right thing to do at the start of your business journey, but as you grow, it might be time to get like some expert opinion on what font works for you, and maybe try to get something that really captures what you're trying to.
Well, I think the takeaway from this is Google is your friend. There's a lot of psychology. There's tons of research. You should be deciding if the font that your brand is working with, one, makes sense for your brand. And if not, what kind of fonts or what font families work for that industry. And then depending on where you're at, deciding what route to take. Do you take a free font? Do you take a purchasable font? Or do you take a custom font? But there's 3 levels. All of them have to come down to matching your brand and being in line with where your brand is at.
I almost thought about talking about that horrible movie we watched, Frosted.
Oh my God. Unfrosted.
Unfrosted, like in the aisles, but like when they launched the Pop-Tart on one side and the country squares on the other, there was a good clip from that of the visual of looking at the Pop-Tart, all the kids, and then looking at the country squares and how they all just went one side and it's the exact same product. Right? That from a branding perspective is interesting, because they were making fun of themselves that their products sucked, their flavors were the same, just with different dyes. And people just bought it based on what
brand
it looked
alone.
like. Yeah.
No, I mean that's the whole thing, right? Is like your brand is your gatekeeper to experiencing your product, and if you're not signaling the right signals to your customer, they're never going to be able to have your brand experience, and that's a big opportunity cost. Like that's really where businesses need to be quite critical on the way their brand is presented.